today I decided I'm going to crack your mind because, Will, you put out these amazing axioms on LinkedIn. I always catch them and they make me think, right? And I go, this is going to make some great content. And we're going to put links to check out Will Schroter's LinkedIn, connect with him there in the description of this video. But Will, I wanted to get into some of these axioms and start asking you some questions because I think we really need to deep dive into some of this and go further, like really dig in because I think it's just so much wisdom. All right, ready to get going?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So first, you said, how many great hours do you have daily? I tracked mine. It's 2.5 in that window. My best writing, clearest thinking, and sharpest creativity happen. The rest, maintenance mode. Your most productive hours are gold. Protect them. Guard your prime time. Will, what compelled you to make a post like this?
Man, kind of a fascinating story. I'd want folks to kind of dig in on this one because holy cow, it's eye-opening. When I first started my first company 30 plus years ago, it was an ad agency. And as part of that, we had to track our hours. Now, we were tracking it so that we could bill clients. I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And I can say this now, I never even tracked my time to what I was doing. I just tracked my time like amorphously to roughly where I thought it was going because I already knew what the bill was going to be. But I was terrible about tracking my time. And I remember, Ed, we had to put in a penalty system for all the employees. We had 700 employees. We had to put in a penalty system if they didn't submit their hours on time. It was like it cost you money. And that penalty would double every time you had another infraction. I was the leader on the board. I think my penalty was up to like $2,500 per infraction. In retrospect, I don't even think that's legal, right? But I remember the look on our CFO's face every time he would send me one of these invoices for my penalty. He was so happy. He was so, I don't know why that guy clearly didn't like me, but it was almost like he was like wringing his hands like, Schroter got you again. So my history with tracking my time is not positive. I have like a traumatized childhood.
And it's true. There's science out there that says we only have like 4 hours max of productive time. And they question this as far as the workplace is concerned. And this particularly applies if you're a startup founder because your time is so valuable. You got 100 things that you could be working on. And they question productivity because they say, why do we work an 8-hour day? Because your day is filled with so much bullshit and you're not having that productive time. And you are saying that you got to 2.5 hours, Will. How does that work out?
Well, okay, so that was the prelude to say I hate time tracking, right? Because that awful CFO beat me with it, right? But years later, I was having this discussion with another founder, and we were talking about productivity and output. And I was saying I work on average about 14 hours a day. This is 20 years ago. And he challenged me. He said, in how many of those hours are you useful? And it never occurred to me up until the time he told me that to question it. And I couldn't get it out of my head. So I go home and I fired up an Excel spreadsheet and I said, I'm going to track every 15 minutes of my day as to what I did and essentially have another column that says, what did I output? Key difference, okay?
Yeah.
Not what did I do? What did I have to show for it? For example, spent 1 hour in a meeting. What do I have to show for it? Nothing, right? See, this is where it starts to get interesting, right? Everyone audits the activity. They don't audit the outcome. That's where this started to become eye-opening. I did it for a couple weeks. It wasn't that in-depth and it wasn't that scientific, but I did it for a couple weeks. When I went back on my spreadsheet, it made me sick. Ooh. It made me sick how hard I was working, like how many hours I was putting in, and how many times consistently in that column, Ed, nothing tangible was done.
Yeah.
And when I averaged it out, it turned out that on any given day, I had a 2.5-hour window, which, by the way, was almost always contiguous. It wasn't like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. It's what people call flow. And so I had particular times in the day where I had flow, and then everything else was just maintenance. Have you gone through this exercise?
I have many, many times. Auditing time.
What'd you learn?
I learned that I allow my systems, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, that my systems were totally whack. I hemorrhaged time all over the place. And the other thing that I learned, which was really interesting when I went through this, Will, I would put myself on what they call the critical path. So it's like a train. And if I was like 5 minutes late or I didn't get something done, then it was like a jackknife situation where it was a domino effect of catastrophic time suck. And I ended up getting so stressed. And so I could correlate the days where I did a lot of stuff that felt urgent, but wasn't important, and I got nothing done to my levels of stress and my performance later on.
Right. And here's the thing. We just assume that effort equals output. Effort sometimes just equals effort. Like I can go a full day and get nothing done. I can be busy as hell, but not accomplish anything. And again, it took me a minute to decouple those things. And now I realize, like, when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, hey, I'm going to get stuff done, the high value stuff, and for me, high value is creative output where I need flow specifically. The high value stuff has a very short window. By the way, high value for me never occurs after noon. Never, ever. I've never written something meaningful after 12 o'clock.
Yes, I agree.
I don't know why. I mean, I'm sure there's science behind it. I don't know why, but I know now that if I didn't get that thing written or that thing done well before noon, it ain't getting done. Same way I feel about working out. If I don't work out by a certain hour, it's not going to happen.
So that leads us to this question, Will, because founders really get caught up in hustle culture is, one of these prevailing sort of toxic things that we have where they say, hey, if you want to get more done, just work double the hours. Like, it's just not going to work. And so founders have to make meaningful use of their time. So this is the question for you. Let's talk about this. How should founders manage their time? What advice, what hacks, what frameworks, what would you say?
I think, Ed, you've probably been through this. You kind of have to bucket your time. You've got to be able to say, kind of like that flow state, this is time where I'm going to do my high value stuff. And maybe you're not into it. Like maybe that time slot hits and you're not inspired, or you just you haven't figured out the problem yet. Okay, fine, right? You'll get another one later. But for me, again, I mentioned like I don't write anything important after 12 o'clock, right? I don't know why, but I know that's the case. So when I think about managing my time, I don't have any meetings. Ed, I mean, I don't think you and I have ever had a meeting before noon, generally speaking.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
That's why, right? I know that's the one time. After 12, who cares? Meet with you anytime. It's not gonna change any of my outcomes, right? But if I meet with folks before noon, it's invariably going to cut into a flow state where I get important stuff done. Now, on the flip side, when we're talking about managing our time, I think what we need to manage are our outcomes. Okay, again, when we think about managing time, we think about like, when do I set meetings, things like that. We think about the inputs, like how do I assign my time? We don't think about the outputs. What will I have actually gotten done? Ed, you and I, within our leadership team, on a fairly regular basis, will cancel our team meeting.
Yes.
Because there's no output.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yes, we can have a meeting. We cancel company-wide updates because there's no output that's going to happen, right? Now, is that a good idea? I don't know, but that's how I feel about it. If I can't tell you there's going to be an outcome, I don't want to have a meeting just to have a meeting.
And it works for us, Will. We've got our own culture, and I've never missed out. When you cancel a meeting, you just say, hey, let's just punt. We got nothing going on. I don't sit there and go, oh, but I'm not going to get supported by Will, all these things, and I got all this unfinished work. We always get around it because we built the systems to do so.
You bet. And so, but that's what I mean by managing the inputs, right? By saying, okay, I could spend 2 hours on social media, right, doing updates. What will the output be? Will there be an outcome, or will I just have spend 2 hours on social media, right? Once I started looking at how I spend my time based on the outputs, and by the way, I even applied this to my personal life over time.
That's good.
It turned out I was spending a lot of time with a lot of people who I didn't have that great of an output with, right? And I mean, I'm not trying to knock anybody.
Sure.
Honestly, maybe they probably didn't either. And so I started spending time with fewer people, but spending more time with fewer people for higher quality outputs.
Here's how I do it, Will. A lot of times my day, I don't have the luxury of saying I'm just going to block off because people are wanting to be on my schedule calendar, et cetera. So I block it off, but then I do a prioritization thing where I have a 1, 2, 3 system. So I say, if anything, I need to get this one thing done. It's got the highest leverage, high priority as far as output, using your language. If I get that done, I'll go to bed totally happy at night. Doesn't matter if I've got 100 things on my to-do list. And then when I get that one thing done, I'm going to do 2 things I've got waiting in the back. And then if I get those 2 things, I got 3 extra things that I'm like, I'm just putting there. But literally, I go through my day thinking about the one thing I need to get done. And then the rest, like you said, is maintenance. I take the meetings, I show up to different things, but I can literally track it. You're absolutely right. Like, I will get that one thing done in that quality flow state. And then I'm happy and productive if I prioritize that one thing well.
You bet. And I've always had this kind of approach when it comes to lists and to-do lists, which I love, actually. And my to-do list looks like this. It says today's one thing, and it has one thing. That's my to-do list.
That's
right?
awesome. Yeah.
And now, here's why. Because it forces me to not be able to skirt that issue.
Exactly.
The moment I put a second or third one on, I've baked in an opportunity to not get that done. When there's only one ingredient, you're not going to get it wrong, right? And so what happens for me is the more things I add, the more opportunities I have to not get that done, as well as get a lot of stuff done that actually doesn't matter. That's the biggest thing.
Exactly.
Like, I have 90 things I actually need to get done in a day, but really only one thing that's typically going to move the meter. And how about this, Ed? Have you ever had a problem where you got something done and you just didn't know what else to do because you hadn't made a list? Seriously, what problem does that solve? Right?
Exactly. Yeah, and as founders, we cannot afford to get into the middle management trap where we just do a whole bunch of busy work to make it look like we're busy to our superiors. No, that doesn't cut it. So
Right.
founders, all of you out there, you have to figure out what is your time management system, and you have to be brutally honest, and you have to fight for it like crazy because
Yep.
everybody else will want to infringe on your time.
Yep. Time management is about what you do. It's about what you don't do.
That's great. Okay, for all of you out there in the audience, as well as those watching this on YouTube, feel free to leave your question. We want to answer your questions. Use the Q&A box. We got Jen lurking in the background. She's going to make sure that everything gets answered. Will, let's move on to the next axiom.